says they're all connected and you are good to go.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. I am glad that you have joined us for our second class on the book of Ecclesiastes. I feel like we got off to a good start on Tuesday, but as we think about studying this great book of Ecclesiastes, a couple of foundational things that we talked about in the last class that just want to briefly cover. I don't want to spend a lot of time rehashing some of what we already looked at, but we mentioned that this is Solomon that has written the book, even though there are a lot of people that say that it's not Solomon, that it was probably a book that was written. It's a post-exilic writing, which would mean somewhere after 500 BC. But the writer is clearly claiming to be Solomon. I mean, he doesn't name himself, and there's a reason for that. But the whole idea is that he is king in Jerusalem. He's a son of David. Well, there's only one man that fits that criteria, and that is Solomon. And so I was making the point that does he claim or is leaving the impression that this is Solomon? And the answer is obviously yes, he does. Well, if that's true and you believe in inspiration, then you've got a problem if he's claiming to be Solomon, leaving the impression that he's Solomon, but he's not. He's telling a lie. And so now you have God inspiring a lie, and it is impossible for God to lie. Hebrews chapter 6, God does not lie. Titus chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. So God, if this is his word, and I believe that it is, then there is no way that there is a lie that is being fostered upon us in this book. It is Solomon. And that being true, then that leads us to some other important truths that we know in the Bible, and that is that God had given Solomon his wisdom, his great wisdom that exceeded all those that were before him and those that were going to come after him. And so this is a book written by the smartest man outside of Jesus Christ to have ever walked on the face of the earth, and he is the one that is providing us the information and the wisdom that we have in this book. Now, I'm going to see if I can get, well, Eric, I forgot to have you give me control so I could do my PowerPoint. I don't know if you can change that now or not. Nope. What we have done so far is we have recognized that, and this is so very important. If you were not in the first class, then you've got to make sure that you get this point. This is a sermon. It's a sermon being preached by Solomon, and he is using a literary technique in his sermon where he has drawn us in to this introduction, where in this introduction, he's getting our attention, arresting attention, as they say, by vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And what he is doing is he is purposely laying a foundation that is very bleak, very dark, very negative, very pessimistic. And unfortunately, a lot of the commentaries and writers on this book look at it as being something that is one of the most depressing books in all the Bible, even to the point that some would question, how did it ever even make it into the Bible? It's just so negative and so depressing. It is on purpose, but only for basically the first two chapters. You have got to understand that point. Solomon is saying that without God, everything is vanity, everything is worthless, everything is futile. And so that's the key. And you will notice that he doesn't mention God except one brief time in chapter 1:1 all the way through chapter 2 and verse 23. And so he's laying this foundation of life without God. And life without God is dark. It is bleak. It is depressing. And so that's his point. And so all is vanity. If you take God out of our lives, then what good is your money? What good is your work? What good is your relationships? What good is anything? Well, the bottom line is it's not any good at all. It's actually absolutely futile, vanity. It's chasing after wind. You're going for something that is ultimately not going to serve any purpose at all, but it is just going to be a very negative type of perspective on life. And so that right there has helped me. And I don't know if that a little bit of information helps you when we see so many people in the world that are so down and so depressed and so discouraged, and they're just pessimistic and negative about everything. Well, what is the answer to help someone like that? God is the answer. And we get that from the book of Ecclesiastes, because when you bring God into your life, it completely changes everything. It changes your perspective about work, your perspective about family, your perspective about money. It even changes your perspective about death. It changes everything. God is that one that completely changes our lives and our perspectives. Okay, so he's leaving God out. He's talking about life without God in these first two chapters. Now, I mentioned that for years, I taught this book without revealing what it was that Solomon was doing in the first two chapters, that he was basically just setting us up. But it seemed like it got my students pretty depressed, and believing that this book really was one of the most depressing books to be found in all of the Bible. But it is not that at all. It's something completely different. We just have to understand it. This is the preacher's introduction. All right, so all is vanity. And what he did is he gave illustrations of things that are just continuous, mundane, repetition that just happens over and over and over again. So we talk about a generation goes and a generation comes. And when we think about it, we do the math of how many generations have come and gone since the beginning of time. Lots, hundreds. Well, and so here we are, we're just one more generation on the long line of generations. And if the Lord tarries, our generation will die off, and another generation will replace us. And if time continues, then that generation will die off, and we're going to be buried just like those before us were buried. And as time goes on, we're going to be forgotten. And there may be a gravestone with your name on it, that when you were born and when you died, and maybe your family will say something nice about you on the gravestone, but no one's going to remember you. You're going to be forgotten. And so that's pretty depressing, right? But it's supposed to be. That's the point, that you are not going to be there's got to be more to life than that, where you live 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, and then you die and you're buried and you're forgotten. I mean, is that really it? Is that really all there is to life? It can't be. It absolutely can't be. And Solomon knows that it can't be. And so he's trying to set the stage for how God is that game changer, that total difference maker in our perspective of things. So he gave illustrations of things that are continuous cycles. He talked about the sun rises and the sun sets, and then it hurries to its place again, and how the winds continue to blow and swirl around, and how the rivers flow down into the sea, yet the sea is not full. And then to the rivers, that water will flow again. The process of evaporation is what he is talking about. So then we get to man. And here we are with approximately 6,000 years of human history. And what have we really accomplished in 6,000 years? Oh, yeah, there's been some technological advances. There's been some advances in travel, some advances in weaponry, some advances in medicine, and so on. But Solomon says, but there's not anything that's really new. There are some different slants to travel, to weapons, to medicine, but there's nothing really new. And another thing that is not new is the fact that history is going to repeat itself. Men are just going to keep doing the same dumb things that generations before them have done. And so history is going to repeat itself, and men just don't seem to learn much of anything. And so Solomon says, here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to devote myself with the wisdom that I've been given to try to answer the most crucial question of all. And that is, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of your life and my life? And he uses this phrase, under the sun. That means everywhere. So he doesn't want to find something that might help a particular people and a particular time. He wants to find the answer that is going to be true for all people of every race, of every generation, of every culture, and of every time. That he can say to them, this is what life is all about. This is the purpose of life. And so this is the first part of chapter 1, and we're not done with chapter 1 yet. So let's go back a few verses. If you have your Bible open, Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 14. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. All of these human projects, these building projects, well, men don't build things that last. They are made of materials that aren't meant and designed to be that which is going to last forever and ever. There are natural calamities that bring down the buildings that men have built. All of the various works that men have done, none of them, and this is really his point, because you might say, I'm not sure I completely buy that. I think some men have invented some pretty cool things. Yeah, Solomon would not argue against that. It's not his point at all. His point is, but how did those things answer the ultimate question on what is the purpose of life? They didn't. They didn't. They might have improved life, but they didn't answer the purpose of life. And so it's all vanity. If they're not ultimately going to help solve the most important question of all, then it's vanity. It's striving after wind. You're grasping for something that you're not ever going to capture. And that's what these works have done. And then in verse 16, he says, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. So Solomon knows, and he's not being vain, because God confirms that what he is saying is true, is I'm smarter than everybody. I have more wisdom than anybody that has ever ruled in Jerusalem or even lived before me. And Solomon has been given a mind that can absorb a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. All right, what's the difference between those two words? In the Hebrew, wisdom is the idea of a perception, discernment, where you are able to have information, that's knowledge, kind of know-how, but then you have the wisdom to know how that can be used to the advantage of someone else, to make life better for someone else. And so he's observed a wealth of wisdom and of knowledge. Verse 17, and I set my mind to know. Now, notice his list here: to know wisdom, to know madness, and to know folly. All right, so three categories of life and living, if you will. And so he begins by saying, all right, I want to know wisdom. So that's what I'm going to focus on in trying to get as much wisdom as I possibly can. And so he's got this massive research project that is going on, in which he is going to accumulate he's going to gather all the accumulated wisdom that men have acquired through the previous generations. All right, so he's going to work on that. And if you went and marked your Bible, as I was mentioning before about keywording your Bible, then hopefully you've got the word wisdom colored in your Bible there, and that will help you to see the key words that he's using. All right, then he secondly wants to be open to some alternatives to wisdom, and here he names two. First of all is what some translations refer to as madness. This particular Hebrew word has the idea of delusion, of deception. We don't specifically know what Solomon has in mind, and so this illustration may not be at all what he did. But when we think of something that is madness, that's just dumb to do that. You know, we might think of someone that is going to binge drink. I'm just going to drink until I am just so drunk out of my mind, or I'm going to go on a drug induced trip. And well, we would say that's madness. That is so crazy. You're deluding yourself if you think that is really going to provide any kind of benefit to you whatsoever. And then the third word that he uses here is folly. And we think folly, we think foolishness. But the word is something that is impulsive. It is foolhardy. It's shamelessness. I mean, you're not going to have any twinge of conscience at all. Not going to bother you at all if you do this. With us, it's sort of like, and sometimes parents, have you ever said to your teenager, and I don't know, this just seems to fit teenagers so well, what were you thinking? When you did that, what were you thinking? It's like, what could possibly go wrong? Well, lots of things could go wrong if you had just thought it through. Well, we would say that Solomon is going to try it all, that no stone is going to remain unturned. He's not going to say, well, I just went with wisdom, never really tried anything else. And then someone would say, well, that was your problem, because really the purpose of life and the meaning of life is found in this folly or this madness. So Solomon says, well, I'm not going to let any stone be unturned. I'm going to try it all. All right. He says, though, and he's going to just go ahead and give us uh, the summary of all that he's learned. I realize that this also is striving after wind. So the wisdom, no, it didn't answer the most important question of life. Um, Madness, no. Folly, no. All of that is nothing but striving after wind. So man all by himself with his mental capabilities and his drive to try different things is not going to be able to answer the most important question about life. And if you'll allow me to have a little bit of a diversion here, and this is why people need this book. They need the Bible. They need the Word of God, because only the Word of God is going to be able to give people the answer to the most important question. And so, why do we carry the gospel into all the world, the good news? Well, the reason is because it is the one and only thing that can answer the most important questions that people have, life's toughest questions. We need help in our wisdom, and people today are kind of full of themselves. There's an arrogance with modern man and our uh, medical achievements and technology and so on, but that hasn't changed anything. We still need help. He says in verse 18, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. The more you learn, then sometimes the information that you've acquired, the things that you have learned, are really not helpful at all. As a matter of fact, it almost ends up being counterproductive and very unhelpful. When Solomon did more research, all he found is that the world is so full of bad news and bad things and bad people. We are in an information age, unlike any age over the 6,000 years of human history. We can learn about what is happening on the world, halfway across the world, in real time. I mean, it can be a satellite feed, and we're watching what's happening right now. And maybe it's a war, maybe it's a riot, maybe it's a plague, a natural disaster of some kind, and we're watching it all unfold. And sometimes, we see the misery that happens. I remember vividly watching what was happening with 9/11, as many of you, and watching a television when Hurricane Katrina was hitting New Orleans, and the misery and the flooding and the loss of people's lives and businesses and so on. It was just heartbreaking. Well, with increased knowledge, Solomon says, comes increased pain. We have a saying, ignorance is bliss. Well, if there is any verse in the Bible that would provide a little bit of backing to that particular saying, it would be this verse right here. You can blissfully go along through life not knowing about the terrible things that are happening all over the world. But because we are in this information age, Solomon says that information brings much grief, and increasing pain. All right, as we go into chapter 2, it says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. All right, look at what he's tried so far. He's tried wisdom, he's tried madness, he's tried folly. And so there's yet another category, and that category is pleasure. Now, this word is general enough that it could include sensual pleasures as well as things that are just feel good kind of things. So I said, enjoy yourself. Okay. I'm just going to have fun. And whatever it is, if that looks like that's going to be fun, I'm all in. I'm going to try it. Again, remember what he's trying to do. He's trying to find the answer to life, the meaning of life, and exploring whether that meaning could be found in wisdom, in madness, in folly, and now in pleasure. So, will Solomon be able to say, pleasure? There is the answer to life. Just go and do some things that you really enjoy doing, and you'll find that true life is in those things. But he said, and behold, futility. The pleasure is a waste of time, and it is not ever going to provide the answer to the life's most important question. All right, so some subcategories to pleasure. Laughter. All right, I like to laugh. You like to laugh. He said it's madness. Pleasure, again, what does it accomplish? It might bring just a fleeting bit of happiness, but there's nothing lasting about that at all. And it certainly is not going to, that's the answer to the meaning of life. Well, pleasure is not that. So he says in verse 3, I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely. All right, so maybe it is found in something like wine. And so he is going to give that a try and see if wine might actually be the answer. But he said, I'm going to explore with my mind with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely. All right. So he's not talking about getting stone drunk where you can't think logically, you can't think straight at all. But he is talking about the benefits of drinking wine. One particular writer said his experiment was an experiment in pleasure, not in debauchery. And so let's give wine a try. But certainly drunkenness is not going to be beneficial, because that takes away the logical thinking qualities of the mind. So can't be that. All right. He said, and how to take hold of folly. All right. Where those things that are just right now, we're categorizing them as foolish, but are they really? The only way for Solomon to know is to try those things that are perceived as folly. And then if you like to mark in your Bible, this is the verse right here that you need to underline. And the reason why is because this is a purpose statement verse. At the Bear Valley Bible Institute, where I teach biblical exegesis. One of my classes is on biblical exegesis. And I've devised this thing that I call the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps are the key to unlocking what every book in the Bible is all about. And, I've got prevalence is one of the Ps. the number of words that occur again and again and again, because obviously if the inspired writer is emphasizing these words, then we need to know that. And that's why I recommend color coding your Bibles with these key words. And then I have petition verbs as another P. I urge, I exhort, I beg, I plead. Those are especially found in the writings of the New Testament. It's a Greek style of writing where you're saying what I'm about to say is of utmost importance. Make sure that you are listening to what I'm saying. All right. So you've got prevalence, you've got petition verbs. Prayers are another way of unlocking the purpose of a book, because what logic does it make if the Apostle Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus and saying, when I pray for you, this is what I pray about. And then he's going to turn right around and ignore that in the rest of the letter? Well, of course not. So the prayers reveal really what is on the mind of the inspired writer. And then the fourth P is a purpose statement, where the writer is giving us a clue as to why he is writing his book. Like 1 Timothy 3:15, I write these things to you so that you might know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God. That's a purpose statement. John 20:30 and 31. John says, these things I write so that you may believe in the Son of God. Well, there are many purpose statements in the Bible, and this is one right here. So this is why you need to underline it, because if you want to find one verse in the book of Ecclesiastes that answers the question, what is the book all about? Solomon is saying, and look and see how this supports what I'm saying. Last part of verse 3, until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. There's your purpose statement. That right there reveals what it is that Solomon is trying to accomplish in this book. And he uses key words and key phrases. The word good is one of those key words in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it is the Hebrew word tov is how it's pronounced. T-O-V is how it's spelled. And it has the idea of that which is appropriate. So what is appropriate for men? For the sons of men to do under heaven, another one of our key phrases that talks about universally. So I'm not wanting to just help a certain group of people in a certain location, but under heaven, the few years of their lives. We really don't live that long in the scope of human history, 6,000 years. Well, 70 years or 80 years, when we're talking about thousands of years of human history, is certainly a few number of years. So that being the case, then what we need to do is figure out, what is the purpose of my 70 years or my 80 years? What is the purpose of the short few years that I have? And so Solomon is saying, I'm going to keep working, I'm going to keep studying, I'm going to keep researching until I could see what good there is, what is the ultimate right thing to do in life for sons of man, anytime and of any age. That's what it is that Solomon is trying to accomplish here. So, starting in verse 4, he is going down through verse 8. He is going to enumerate the works. This is a word here that has a reference to projects that I can work on. And there are 9 categories that he's going to talk about here. 9 categories of projects, of works, with the intent of discovering which, if any of these works, are good and worthwhile for the people on earth to do. And he can say that is right there, the best thing to do. And you can find the meaning of life, value in life, the purpose of life by doing those things. Okay, so let's look at these. He said in verse 4, I enlarge my works. First, built houses for myself. Is that really where the ultimate joy and satisfaction and meaning and purpose of life is found? In a house, building maybe a big house with lots of rooms and all of these luxuries that are found within the house. Solomon said, well, everybody seems to want to have their own house. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe that's where the meaning of life can be found. So he didn't build just one. He built houses. I'd love to know how many houses he built, but also I'm not of the opinion of some that Solomon is lying through his teeth here. He didn't build a thing. He's going to talk about working with sheep. He's king. He's not going to be working with sheep. He's king. He's not going to be swinging a hammer. Well, if we truly understand what Solomon is saying that he's doing, he can't do it by default. He's got to swing the hammer. He's got to be the one that is out there in the field with the sheep. He's got to be the one that's building the houses. Otherwise, how can he truly say that he knows what it's like to do this particular project or that? So he said, I built houses for myself. So I'm not doing it for anybody else. I was doing it to see what personal benefit I would get from that. Second, I planted vineyards for myself. Do you like vineyards? I do. And, it's just, there's just something about vineyards that are pretty and the smell is good. And so Solomon says, maybe that's it. So I planted vineyards for myself. And then in the same category, verse 5, I made gardens and parks for myself. Love gardens, love parks. Love to walk through parks, love to walk through gardens and smell the beautiful, the pretty flowers and everything. And then he says, I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. So, these gardens, these parks are going to have pretty flowers. They're going to have fruit trees. They're going to have everything. Now, what is he doing? These are all projects designed to hopefully one of them will answer the question that this is the meaning of life, the purpose of life. This is something that is good for all men everywhere to do. Well, verse 6, the fourth of the 9, I made ponds of water for myself. You like water? You like water activities? You like to fish? You like Solomon said maybe being a water guy is the answer here. Let's give that a try. Notice that he says for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. And so not only enjoyed these ponds of water, but also designed irrigation systems to water his trees and so on. So all of the various benefits of water, from fun activities to productive activities of irrigation, he tried it all. And then the fifth project, verse 7, I bought male and female slaves. Maybe owning someone else is really the answer to life. if you can have that kind of power, of surrounding yourself with people that you say jump, they say how high on the way up. They're at your beck and call. Maybe that's it. And we know throughout human history, there have certainly been some people that have tried that. Well, Solomon tried that. He said, I even had homeborn slaves. So slaves that he was able to influence and teach on what being a good slave was all about from from birth all the way up. Well, he tried that. And then the sixth, I possess flocks and herds larger than all those who preceded me in Jerusalem. Maybe animals is the answer to the meaning of life. Having lots and lots of animals. And so he got flocks and he got herds, and they were big ones, not just, a few, but large ones. And then number 7, I collected for myself silver and gold, the treasures of kings and provinces. There's a commercial on TV about someone that is trying to get us to buy gold and silver. And he says, I just like the feel of silver in my hands or gold in my hands, whichever it is. Well, Solomon is saying, maybe that's it. Maybe what I need to do is just have lots of gold and silver that I can have in my hands. The treasures of kings and provinces would include, fancy jewelry and things along that line. And then number 8, research project, and I'm in verse 8. I provided for myself male and female singers. Maybe entertainment really is the answer to the meaning of life. I'm going to surround myself with the best singers and musicians that there are, and just let them entertain me. So, there are a lot of people today that sort of get lost in that particular arena. They like to be entertained, and that's what they do. They spend all their time watching TV or listening to music or sports or something like that, but it's all entertainment. And then the 9th and final one, he says, the pleasures of men, many concubines. Now, those of you that have the King James and the New King James and the American Standard version are going to have something different than that. It'll be musical instruments or something to that along those lines. But it is very unlikely that the pleasures of men are musical instruments. That makes no sense, really. Many concubines is the best reading of this particular text. And so it also fits with what it is that Solomon is trying to say. And that is, I'm going to just, the pleasures of men, I'm going to have many women. And we know for a fact that he most certainly did, as we read in 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon, between his wives and concubines, had 1,000 women that were at his disposal. And so is that the answer? Is that what I can tell men? You just need to have lots of women. So those are the 9. He says in verse 9, then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All right, so he did all of these things. He learned a lot while he was doing all these things. But now that we have gone through those various projects. And the whole point is find another category that won't somehow fit in those 9 categories. Well, those are pretty much going to be it. And he was wise enough to see the futility in all of these activities, all of these possessions. And he says that my wisdom stood by me. So I was not sort of lost in the projects themselves, but I continue to be thinking about the benefit of those various activities. So while he's being entertained by the professional singers and musicians, he's saying, is this really going to provide the answer to life? And he says that it made him great, and he increased more than all who were before him in Jerusalem. So he's learned a lot more than anybody else had learned prior to him. And so what Solomon had done is what had earned him the reputation where people that lived in faraway places, even all the way down into Egypt, people were aware of what Solomon was doing. So what is then his assessment of those 9 research projects? He says, and all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. All right. He saw something. I want that. Well, he had the money and he had the power to take whatever, wherever he wanted. And then he said, and I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. All right. So I'd like to try that. I'd like to do that, or I'd like to experience that. Solomon, again, had the wealth and the power to engage in any activity, excuse me, that he might want to be involved in. All right. So again, as I mentioned before, this was Solomon's way of saying, I left no stone unturned. There was nothing that I was going to leave out, because sure enough, if I left something out, that would be the thing that ended up being the meaning of life. And I wasn't going to let that happen. And so he's doing it all, experiencing it all, acquiring it all. And his wisdom was with him throughout the whole thing. And then he says, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. So he did not find the answer to his quest. In all of those activities, he did not find the meaning of life, but he did find one surprise benefit: the work itself. The work itself. That was the only lasting pleasure. He says, my heart was pleased with what he had experienced. The mental exercise, the trying to understand, the researching. Solomon considered that to be a reward. That was a benefit. But once the work was done, there was no longer any satisfaction. So while discovering satisfaction in the work itself, Solomon did discover an important truth. Now, granted, it isn't the answer to the meaning of life, but he discovered an important truth, and that is men should find reward in the things they do. They should find satisfaction. You know, it's not crazy for someone to actually like their job. As a matter of fact, we need to learn to find satisfaction in the work that we do. And it's not the job as much as it is the attitude that we have regarding that job. You can be happy as a ditch digger, as a commode cleaner. Actually, today, wouldn't that be called a laboratory technician? Some fancy term like that. But this is a guy that cleans toilets, lavatory technician. I think that's probably the right phrase. Notice how Solomon is going to come back around and make that point again. In chapter 3 and verse 22, he's going to say, nothing is better that man should be happy in his activities. And then in chapter 5 and verse 18, he'll say, enjoy oneself in your labor. And then chapter 9 and verse 9, enjoy the toil in which you have labored. So Solomon is going to repeat that particular idea several times in the book. So why is it that you've got two people that have the same job? One hates it and one loves it. How can you have two ditch diggers and one hates it and one loves it? Attitude. The attitude with which one approaches any job is the difference maker. And so Solomon is reminding us that we need to have a good attitude, a positive attitude. And if we do, then whatever work we do, we can find a level of reward and satisfaction in that. The word labor, by the way, if you've marked your Bible, is one of Solomon's favorite words in this book. All right, so he says, verse 11, thus I considered all my activities, he just named 9 of them, which my hands had done. Again, that's my conviction that Solomon really did swing the hammer. He really did build the house. He really did tend to the sheep and so on. Which the labor which I had exerted. So sometimes, I mean, it was hard work. He's king and he's getting all dirty and sweaty. And I imagine people are saying, Solomon, you're king. Hello, you shouldn't be getting all dirty and smelly. But Solomon had a purpose in mind. So he is exerting himself. So the conclusion, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. It's all vanity. It's futile. It's worthless. It does not answer the most important question itself. But once the work is done, it doesn't provide a lasting kind of satisfaction. So it's vanity. It's striving after wind. You're trying to catch something, acquire something that you're not going to be able to catch. You're not going to be able to acquire. And bottom line, no profit under the sun, everywhere, anywhere, doesn't matter. If someone was in a completely different country trying to discover the same things, doing the same projects, he's going to come up with the same empty conclusion that I did. Man, so again, we keep striking out in answering life's most important question. So verse 12, I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. Now, you probably are saying, he already did that. Well, this is round 2. Solomon is saying, I'm going to make one more run at this. I'm going to again make sure that I didn't somehow miss something along the way. So I'm going to do those 3 things that he mentioned in the last part of chapter 1. I'm going to try to learn more, try these things that are considered to be madness and folly. Maybe I overlooked something. So that's what he's going to try to do. And he recognizes what's killing me is the inability to answer this question. And is the next king that follows me, is somehow he's going to be able to figure out how to do this? Well, we know that's not the case. If I'm not able to figure it out, and this is what's so depressing, no one will. because Solomon was the wisest of the wise. And if he is not going to be able to answer life's most important question, then that means, and Solomon hates the thought, that um, we're just going to keep going through life and no one's ever going to know what is the true meaning and purpose of life. Because he says, again in verse 12, for what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? See, you already covered that in chapter 1, is this whole idea of meaningless repetition. The next generation does the same thing that the previous generation did. They made the same mistakes. They chase after the same futile things, chasing after wind under the sun. So how am I going to stop this mindless cycle of repeating the same things over and over again? He says in verse 13, and I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. Someone might say, well, if you're really not going to be able to come up with the answer to the meaning of life, then I'm just going to go the pleasure route. I mean, if it ultimately doesn't matter, and everybody's going to die in their ignorance, then I'm just going to party on. I'm just going to have fun and be pleasure mad. But Solomon says, well, hold the horses on that, because wisdom is better than folly. It excels folly, just like light does darkness. And, that's a good thing. Light enables us to get out of darkness and see things clearly. Well, wisdom has that kind of benefit. So while wisdom is not going to be able to answer the most important question of life, it's certainly better than choosing a life of just, partying on and being pleasure mad. When I was a little kid, I think maybe the very first time that there was a statement from Ecclesiastes that was made, it was this one, verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head. Well, as our teenagers today would say, duh, isn't that where the eyes are supposed to be? But this was actually an ancient phrase that had the idea that the wise man uses the equipment that God has given him in order to increase in wisdom, to see things and learn from what he sees. And so the wise man who has eyes uses those eyes to look around, to observe, to think about what it is that he has seen. Why is that the way it is? Why is that person doing what they're doing? Why did they build it that way? Why did they do it? So through the power of eyes, observation, the wise man uses the eyes that are connected to the head that has the brain, and they're constantly working to learn some new things, which, by the way, is why I'm grateful that you're in this class. I'm assuming that you're studying the book of Ecclesiastes because you have a desire to learn more. And that's to your credit for sure. The fool walks in darkness. So the fool is one that, and in the Bible, darkness is, light represents holiness and truth, and darkness represents that which is sinful and ignorant. And that's his point here, is ignorance. Because when you're in a dark room, you don't know what's going on and you can't see where you're going. And so the fool is living his life in darkness. Now, it's a self-imposed darkness. He would have opportunity to see clearly if he would use the eyes that are in his head, but he chooses not to. He wants to stay in darkness. But as Solomon is contemplating that truth, he says, and yet I know that one fate befalls them both. I don't know if you've been to a funeral of someone that had passed away that was very, very smart. I know as a young man, I would go to funerals of some of my favorite teachers, and I would look at their body in the casket, and I would think that brain with all of that knowledge, all of that wisdom, all of that insight, it's gone. And I wish there would be some way that I could teleport that into my brain, because I sure would like to have what they had, which they no longer need. And Solomon is saying, yeah, wisdom's better than folly. But the bottom line is both of them are going to end up dead. And so what then is the difference between this dead body over here, which was a very smart, wise man, and this dead body over here, which was a fool that just stumbled through life and never really amounted to anything at all? They're both dead now. And the same thing's going to happen to both of their bodies. Now, I need to make an aside here. When we talk about wisdom literature, and I mean Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, they were focused on this life. They were not looking to the next life and eternal life and so on. So don't fall into the trap that some have and look at a verse like this and say, well, apparently Solomon did not believe in an afterlife. Apparently Solomon didn't believe in heaven. Their focus was on this life. And so, he's not even talking about that. He's not even talking about what there is in that's going to happen after a person dies. He's just saying, and Job did the same thing. If you look at Job chapter 3, Job said, you look at kings and princes and you look at slaves, and all of them look exactly the same in the grave. Even those that had a really hard life and were tormented in life, maybe their bodies were racked with pain or disease, they look perfectly fine in the grave. Well, Job is not trying to get theological. He's just stating a fact of observation, because that's the way people that are in the casket look. They look like they are at peace. That's the only point that he's trying to make. And so is it with the wise man and the fool. Both of them die. And from that point on, you're saying, I'm not really seeing any difference between this guy over here that's wise and this guy over here was the fool. Well, because at that point, there isn't any difference. Physically, they have both died. So verse 15, then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool will also befall me. All right, so I'm the smartest of all, and I can't stop the natural aging process. I'm headed to the grave just like the fool is. And so that being the case, he says, why then have I been extremely wise? I mean, what was the point of learning all those things? You devoted your life to all of this learning. To what end? What advantage did it really serve? Well, when you're looking at two bodies in the grave, none. There was no discernible advantage. You can't look at one and say, well, look at how his wisdom is really helping him out now. Well, it's not helping him out now. He's dead. and his body is going to return to dust, just like the guy over here that was the fool. And so, why did a person spend all their life learning all these things? We might say, why did we spend our lives going to college, getting a degree? Because when death comes, none of that matters, and none of that is going to be of any benefit at all. And then he says in verse 16, for there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool. Now, on the one hand, you might say, I kind of get why the fool would be forgotten, because he really didn't have that many friends to begin with. He really didn't do anything in his life that was worthy of note, that's even worth remembering. So I totally get why the fool is one that dies and is buried and everybody forgets about him. But there's no lasting remembrance of the wise man either. The wise man that learned all these things and acquired all these things, because as Solomon said, and we already talked about this in the first class, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. You know, you go to the cemetery, and this guy may have been a PhD, and this guy may have not ever got past sixth grade in school. Who cares? I mean, what difference does it make between the two of them? So he said, all is going to be forgotten. They're not going to be remembered. Last part of verse 16, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. So there is the point. Both of them are going to die. And that's just the way it is. And nobody escapes death. Now, we understand when we think of some New Testament passages like Hebrews 9 and verse 27, is appointed a man once to die, and after this comes the judgment. So God's plan, beginning with the fall of Adam and their expulsion from the Garden of Eden, that death was a part of the human existence. So you're not escaping death with wisdom or being a fool, for that matter. Verse 17, so I hated life. You become jaded. You become pessimistic. You become depressed because you work so hard to maybe acquire this knowledge and information, only to be told and only to find that, it really didn't do you any good. You accumulate all these things. It really didn't do you any good. So your life and my life and all the things that we've accomplished, it really no benefit, no profit. It's all futile. It's all vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Everything that you've done is vanity. All right. So here I am, and I've lived 60 plus years, whatever. Nothing really gained, no advantage to anything that I've done in my life. Well, man, that's a real downer. You hate to look at your life and say, man, you didn't accomplish anything. Yeah, you're going to die and everybody's going to forget you. And wow. So I hated life, Solomon says. And if you drop down to the first part of verse 18, thus I hated life. So he's going to repeat that phrase, or I hated. He's going to repeat that hated phrase again. He says, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me. All right, universally, everywhere on the planet, all of the works that were done, man, it was something that he says it was grievous to me. And the idea was, it was worthless. It was It's really bad in the sense, and some say that the word is evil, but he doesn't mean evil like its origin is from Satan. That's not at all his point there. But it was bad in the sense that it was worthless. It didn't accomplish anything of true value. And so he says, because everything is futile, is futility and striving after wind. So he again makes this blanket summary statement that he has made before. As a matter of fact, if you go back and look at chapter 1 and verse 14, all is vanity and striving after wind. And then, of course, you go back to the opening of his sermon in chapter 1 and verse 2, vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Well, all he has done so far is prove that just how true that is. Wisdom, vanity. Works, vanity. Knowledge, vanity. Pleasure, no. Madness, folly, no. All is vanity and striving after wind. So he says, verse 18, thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. So now he is able to look at all of those houses he built. Doesn't really give him any pleasure, any lasting satisfaction at all. He looks at those ponds of water. He looks at his large flocks. He looks at those professional entertainers. He looks at his 1,000 wives and concubines, and there's no satisfaction for any of that. Well, the fruit of his labor, all that he has accumulated. And he says, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. All right, so I've worked hard and I've accumulated all of these things, and I'm not going to be able to benefit from any of that because I'm going to die and be buried. And all of the things that I've done and all the things that I've accumulated is just going to be passed on to someone else. And he says, verse 19, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. This is something that is just eating Solomon up and saying that too is nothing but vanity. I, for a number of years, was a financial planner. And on many occasions, I would sit down with a person or a couple, and we would talk about their financial plan, their estate, and what they intended to do with that when they passed on from this life. And many of those that I worked with were Christians, but yet they had a real struggle, some of them, and that is their kids were not Christians. As a matter of fact, their kids were very worldly, and they had accumulated maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they know very well that when they die, if they give their children that $100,000 or that $500,000 or whatever it is, that they're going to end up spending it on their own hedonistic pleasures. And it's just going to further perpetuate their life of sin, their materialistic ways and thinking. And so they were like Solomon, that I've accumulated all these things, and then I'm going to end up leaving it to someone. He says, who knows if they're going to be wise or a fool? Well, a lot of times we parents already can see the handwriting on the wall on that, because if our children are already grown and gone, and have been out of our house for some time, they've made their way. And it's pretty clear whether they've chosen a spiritual direction or a sinful, non-spiritual direction. And so sometimes they would ask me the very difficult question, which actually for me wasn't a difficult question at all, but for them it was. And that is, would you leave this money to your children if they were not faithful Christians? And I said, no, absolutely not. There are so many good works in the world, works of the church that are dependent upon the support of the church, of faithful brothers and sisters. I'm a part of one of those works. The Bear Valley Bible Institute in Denver is that which is completely supported by free will offerings, by people contributing to the work. People that say that I believe what you folks at Bear Valley are doing and training preachers in Denver and all over the world. And we want to help with that. Well, it takes money. It takes money to do what we're doing. You know, we've got teachers that need salaries in order to teach full time. And, you know, we've got supporting personnel for office manager and a bursar and librarian and facilities. And we've got preacher training schools, over 45 of them, Bear Valley does, all over the world. Well, how are those teachers supported? And what are those students going to live on when they attend school full time? Well, it takes a lot of money. And I am so thankful. I've been at Bear Valley since 1985. And Eric, no comments about, man, you're old. But I have been at Bear Valley a long time. And I am so thankful, more than words can express, for those couples that said, we're not going to leave our estate to our unfaithful children. We're going to give it to works like Bear Valley. And because of that, Bear Valley has been able to do some of the worldwide works that we're doing now, training over 1,000 men worldwide. If you think, what is going to happen in the future of the church? Well, 2 Timothy 2:2, you got to train faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And that's what we're doing. We're training faithful men, and they'll be able to teach others also. And they teach their own people. So unlike our missionary practices in the past, we are bringing the training to those men who learn shoulder to shoulder with men just like them, the same country, same nationality, same language. And then they are able to take the gospel to their own people. Well, how effective has it been? And I know you're saying, boy, Denny has kind of gotten off on a side here, but Eric said, talk a little bit about Bear Valley. And so I wanted to do a little bit of that. But in the course of the years of our training, at the end of every year, we accumulate statistics on how many Bible studies we conducted, how many people were baptized, how many churches were planted, how many churches were restored, that we had lost an entire church of people to denominationalism. And so we have our various schools report those statistics, and they are absolutely astronomical and astounding. Last year in 2019, we baptized over 3,000 people. Over the last 4 years, over 20, I forget now, it's like 10 to 12,000 people have been baptized. This is just our students in our schools. We have restored dozens of churches. We have planted hundreds of churches. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I've got a full catalog of statistics and that I can tell you about the work that we're doing in Denver and training men and women for ministry and the work that we're doing. Just send me an email at dpetrillo@wetrainpreachers.com, and I'll be happy to get you that information. But go to our website and you can learn more about that. As a matter of fact, I've done a short video because of what's happening in the world right now. It's very difficult for students to raise support. And we're having a special call to our brothers and sisters all over the world to help us. They haven't been able to get out and talk to churches. They haven't been able to raise money. And so they're very discouraged. We've already accepted them. We've already done the background check and everything, but they just weren't able to raise the money. And so we're trying to get our brothers and sisters and churches to help us in this critical period to get these people to school. And if you can help, that would be great. So our website, www.wetrainpreachers.com. And another thing, this will be the last, I promise. They were going to move on. But I did mention, and I got a couple of emails saying, I didn't quite get the information about your book. I do have a commentary on Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. It is a part of the Truth for Today commentary series that is done by the brethren that are located in Searcy, Arkansas. So you can go to their website. It's Resource Publications, I believe it's .com, and they'll have a list of all of the commentaries. I also have one on Ezekiel, and I am just now finishing up another one on Proverbs. And so hopefully that will be some information too that might be of value to you. Okay, so he doesn't want to leave his estate to someone that may end up being a fool. All right, little quiz for you here. Was Solomon's son a wise man, or was he a fool? Rehoboam was a fool. And everything that Solomon had built, everything that Solomon had done, was in fact left to someone that was a fool. And it didn't take Rehoboam long to destroy that United Kingdom that Solomon had built. And so the very thing that concerned Solomon ended up being the truth. Now, as I have argued that Solomon is the author of this book, I also argue that this is a book that is written toward the end of Solomon's life, and that the mistakes that Solomon made in his life that we read about with his wives turning his heart away from God, 1 Kings chapter 11, that Ecclesiastes is that which kind of tells us the end of the story. At least I'm wanting to be optimistic and believe that it is the end of Solomon's story in a very optimistic way, that he came back around. He left God for sure for a time, but he eventually came back around and came up with the conclusion that what really is important in life is to fear God and keep his commandments. So he said, I've labored by acting wisely. I've accumulated all these things, and it's vanity to end up leaving it to someone who is a fool. Verse 20, therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. I mean, this really got to Solomon, and it bothered him. And my years as a financial planner, I learned just how true this is, that these people that were, on the one hand, society says, you leave your estate to your kids. That's just what you're supposed to do. That's just the way it is. But there was some nagging problem that just didn't make sense, especially if they're Christians and their children are not faithful Christians. And so Solomon completely despaired. He said it just bothered him for everything that he had labored under the sun. Verse 21, he says, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom and knowledge and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and is a great evil. Boy, haven't we seen that particular principle occur so often in life, is that somebody suddenly comes into a lot of money and they do one foolish thing after another foolish thing after another foolish thing. And well, that happens. People do not know how to handle money. And if they get rich quick, they especially don't know how to handle money. And so next thing you know, they have done a lot of very foolish things and have really ended up hurting themselves in the long run. I've got a file in which I was saving articles, and I actually stopped because it was the same story over and over again of someone that wins the lottery, for an example, and all of a sudden they're a millionaire, multimillionaire, and then they come back around, the reporter 1 year later, and they're absolutely broke and they're deep in debt. Well, what happened to that $1 million, or what happened to that several $1,000,000 that you got? And the person says, I squandered it. I got all this money and I'm giving it to friends and family, and I'm going on these lavish vacations and I'm buying all this stuff. And they got in over their head. They didn't know how to use the money. Next thing you know, it's all gone. And so Solomon says, this whole thing is a great evil. I work so hard to get what I have, and then to give all that money, all that wealth to someone that they haven't had any skin in that game. They haven't worked and they haven't earned, and technically they don't deserve any of it, but yet they get it. Well, they get it, but they don't appreciate it. He says that's vanity, and that is a great evil. All right. Well, according to my clock, our time is up. Thank you so much for joining me in this great book of Ecclesiastes. I know I get a little bit excited sometimes. I just love this material so much. It has enriched my life. I hope it's enriching yours too. Thank you again so much for joining us, and God bless.